Coming up, a budding feud between two of the SEC's big-name coaches, some big praise for the Florida defense, and an update on LSU's quarterback competition. It's all on the way next on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome into SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Busy show for us. We'll get a chance to check in later on with former Tennessee wide receiver and the host of the Swain event all around the state of Tennessee, Jason Swain, on today's program. We'll do that a little less than 10 minutes from right now. I want to begin, though, above the fold with the big story of the day, and really the big story of the last few days around the SEC, what seems to be a little bit of, and I'm going to take some liberties here and maybe kind of describe this in, I guess, a more intense fashion than it probably actually exists in real life, but a budding feud between Texas A&M coach Jimbo Fisher and Alabama coach Nick Saban. This all starts a few days ago when Fisher, like a lot of coaches at least used to do pre-pandemic, and certainly years before this, prior to the advent of social media and all the internet stuff, there was a lot of rubber chicken circuit, booster club type, meals during the off season where coaches would travel around their state and they would talk up their program. That's less necessary in the modern age in which we live, but some of this kind of stuff still goes on. Fisher, the Aggies coach, was at one of these events not too long ago and facing some questions about Alabama and maybe the future for Texas A&M, kind of once Nick Saban is done as Alabama coach. Obviously, they've been the bull of the woods there in the SEC West. Fisher gave his crowd, Aggies fans, what they wanted to hear, tossing some red meat in their direction. Brent Zwerneman, I think, was one of the original guys on hand for this. Alex Scarborough, I guess, as well, from ESPN. Let me show you the quote here from Jimbo Fisher. By now, many of you are aware of this. In being asked, hey, what's going to happen, once Nick Saban is gone? Jimbo Fisher at this Booster Club event says, we're going to beat his fill in the blank, backside, behind, whatever you want to put there. Obviously, Jimbo used a different word. We're going to beat his behind when he's there. Don't worry about that, Jimbo Fisher said. And obviously, there's huge cheers coming from all the fans at Texas A&M who like the idea of a coach talking big like that. Of course, the one thing I think many of us understand is that's not the same thing as saying something like that in a press conference. This is his fans. This is not a media event. It was covered by media, and these days there's no such thing as a local story anymore. But coaches have been saying stuff like this for decades, and it rightly so sometimes doesn't get a lot of attention. This is one of those rare moments where this kind of thing happened to kind of sort of creep out into the world a little bit, and obviously, as you might imagine, it got some attention in Tuscaloosa, Alabama as well. But there was a very funny moment a few days ago when a reporter, Simona Lee, who does a great job there in the state of Alabama, caught up with Alabama coach Nick Saban. She asked him, hey, did you hear what Jimbo Fisher said? And Nick Saban's response to all this was really pretty entertaining there as well. This is the exchange that the reporter had with Nick Saban. Good stuff. Take a listen to this.
Coach, got to ask, your friend Jimbo said yesterday that at some point while you're in Tuscaloosa, he was going to beat your butt. That wasn't the word that he used, but did you have any response for that?
In golf?
I think you meant on the football field.
Well, I'm sure there'll come a day, but is that what he was talking about? Football?
He was talking about football.
Oh, he was? He used to be on my noontime basketball league, I guess. We're no longer partners, when it comes to that. Coach. Now, they have a really good team, really good program, and, they're getting better and better all the time, and there's a lot of challenges in the SEC, and they're certainly one of the up-and-coming programs, and he's always been a great coach, did a great job for us when he was with us, and he's had a great career as a head coach. So, it's going to be a challenge for us, no doubt, when we have to play him.
Tennille Calvino, watching us on Facebook right now, says, I like the smack talk back and forth between the two coaches. And frankly, I agree with Tennille on this. I'm not an Alabama fan. I'm not a Texas A&M fan. Those are not my, favorite SEC teams. But for the rest of us, I think this is really entertaining. And ultimately, I think probably more will be made than should be by Fisher just trying to rile up his Booster Club audience in a meal like that. There's no doubt, and you heard in the Nick Saban response of, wait, you talking about football or you talking about golf in terms of, beating his behind there? Obviously, Alabama Alabama will try to use some of this kind of stuff as bulletin board material. That's just what programs do. Even if Nick Saban deep down knows that it's not really that big of a deal, certainly he will allow his strength coaches, those are usually the ones that end up being kind of the architect for a lot of this kind of motivational ploy, he'll allow them to do what they want to do, and any potential edge you can get, you'll obviously look forward to taking that. That's what Nick Saban's going to do here. But I think that Tennille and the other commenters who are saying something similar are actually pretty correct on this. That when you have these two coaches who are willing to say something, and to Fisher's credit, he went on an Austin, Texas radio station the other day, asked about the comments, given a chance to back down from them, really chose not to do so. So he's at least standing behind what he said, and I say good for him for doing so. That there's this thought of Alabama is such a behemoth, and Alabama is such a dominant program around the landscape of college football. You better tiptoe around them. You better be really careful about what you say. You better not do anything to make Nick Saban mad. Well, let me ask you a question, and I mean this in sincerity. How's that working out for the coaches who've been really careful around Nick Saban, who have tried not to make him mad, tried not to poke the bear, tried not to get him stirred up, tried not to be too, get him too ornery? The Alabama program playing in defense of their coach, trying not to get them too upset. Is that really working? Is that making it any easier for any program in college football? There is something to be said that, you know what? Talking big and making my team feel like they ought to have some confidence going in and playing a game like that. The Texas A&M given the money, the power, the resources that it has, why should it, at least in the mind of those in College Station, why should it take a backseat to what's happening in Tuscaloosa? Why shouldn't a coach like Jimbo Fisher, one of the very small few who are actually can say on his resume that he's won a national championship, why should, Jimbo Fisher cower in fear of Nick Saban? I mean, I'm reminded of what happened after the LSU-Alabama game back in 2019. Remember when LSU got that win on the road in Tuscaloosa, and there's an LSU player that kind of had his Instagram Live going, or whatever social media feed that it was, capturing the comments of Ed Orgeron in the locker room after that game and said, we're going to beat their behind in recruiting. We're going to, basically going to take the fight to them wherever they go. It's this big, bold, strong moment for Ed Orgeron. One of my kind of small-scale conspiracy theories is, a lot of times when I see videos like that kind of popping up, I'm always left to assume that my guess is that was probably an intentional leak, that LSU either allowed that video to take place or wasn't too upset once they found out that it was shared all over the internet, that I think in Baton Rouge it felt really good to be taking the fight to Nick Saban, Alabama. Now, it didn't last very long. Last year, Alabama obviously got some revenge and beat up LSU pretty good. But the idea that the best way to defeat Nick Saban, or the best way to counterbalance what Nick Saban does, the kind of mild-mannered, even-keeled behavior that he brings to the SEC landscape, the best way to handle all that kind of stuff is to take the fight to him. In Jimbo Fisher's case, he may have accidentally stumbled into this, but when it's all said and done, I'm not quite so sure that whole idea isn't a pretty good way to go about all of this. And for the rest of us who are not Tide fans, who are not Aggies fans, I think it's pretty entertaining there as well. So we'll take your comments about that. Our big story above the fold here on SEC Country Live here today. A lot of folks weighing in on both Facebook and YouTube, but it's the opinion of our guest, who I know you want to hear from. We're going to get ready to speak to Jason Swain here, former Tennessee wide receiver. And the story we're going to deal with Swain is obviously the transfer of Henry To'oTo'o, leaving Tennessee, a place where he put up big numbers a year ago for that Vols defense, and obviously the departure of Jeremy Pruitt as coach and the NCAA-related turmoil around all of that, a big part of the reason that To'oTo'o leaves. But he goes to Alabama, which you can say is arguably Tennessee's biggest rival. In fact, I think a lot of Vols fans probably do feel that way, that Alabama, third Saturday in October, the biggest rival that this program has. And I have said that on the, in the realm of what's going on here within the SEC, that To'oTo'o leaving Knoxville to go to Tuscaloosa, this is a much bigger deal, I would say, on the Tennessee side of things than it is on the Alabama side of things. The truth is, you expect Alabama to have a good player at every spot, whether it's a Tennessee transfer or a former five-star high school recruit or kind of everything else in between. You just sort of expect that to be the case. To'oTo'o or somebody else, it's kind of all the same thing there on that front. But for Tennessee, this is a tough moment for Vols fans. Watching one of the guys that they've had great respect for, they enjoyed cheering for, and now you think about him actually playing against Tennessee on the third Saturday in October. I think this is a tough situation, and obviously it's reflective of kind of the new world in which we live. And so for more on this right now, let's talk to Jason Swain. He is the host of the Swain Event, a terrific program all across the state of Tennessee, talking SEC football, talking everything else. And, of course, Jason, a former Tennessee wide receiver there as well. Jason, welcome back to SEC Country Live. I appreciate you making some time for us today, and I hope you're doing well.
I hope you're well, too. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. Let me start with the Henry To'oTo'o news. I've said that to me, if you're a Vols fan, this is kind of a tough spot to be, right? You get to enjoy Henry as a player, and you hope, certainly for younger Vols fans, they're going to have a chance to root for this guy, next, couple of years, whatever else. And all of a sudden now the possibility exists that he's going to be playing against you for the rival that I would imagine Tennessee fans probably hate more than any other. I think this is a tough look for the SEC to see how easy these guys can kind of move from one spot to the next within the league the moment some adversity strikes. You're obviously a former Tennessee player. You talk to a lot of Vols fans each and every day. What is the atmosphere around the state about the fact that To'oTo'o is now in Tuscaloosa?
Well, I think Tennessee fans were kind of prepared for this. Henry hasn't been in Knoxville training, being with his former teammates since the new coaching staff was hired. He was in California taking online classes. And so I think people had moved on months ago. But, it was official, last week, I guess. And, it reflects probably more on the player than it does the SEC. I wouldn't imagine I could never switch from one school to a school that I played inside of the SEC. I couldn't do it. Georgia, Alabama, Florida. I couldn't stomach putting on another color that I played against for 2 years, especially as a bitter rival. But these kids see everyone's making money around them. They see coaches getting paid to be at home and not coached. They see everything that's going on, and so hey, some kids don't have any shame in their game, and Alabama's certainly a great place to go and be developed and win and try to get to the next level. You see with the NFL draft each and every year, and those guys want to play in the NFL. So I understand it, but Tennessee fans were pretty prepared for this. When Henry's dad reached out to the Alabama website and was talking about how he wished they would have went there in the first place. Pretty big kick in the gonads to the fans and Henry's teammates and his coaches. Just not how you do business, not what you do in that situation. So folks were prepared, and I think people are ready to move on. Tennessee got themselves a transfer linebacker in Juwan Mitchell.
Sure.
And so they're just trying to move on with guys that want to be there.
Do you think, and I'm obviously asking this from the perspective of a former player because, this is a little bit different whether you're fan, player sometimes, that the SEC rule that's probably going to be, I'm assuming with To'oTo'o going to Tuscaloosa, the expectation is the SEC is going to allow immediate eligibility for intra-conference transfers, something up until 2020 you had never done before, and they said last year this was going to be kind of a one-time thing, but you sort of get the appearance that rule is about to dissolve here. Do you think that is the way that it should be, or should there be some sort of disincentive from just sort of bouncing from one SEC team to the next the moment some adversity strikes the place where you currently are located?
I always felt like players should have more freedom, more power. But at the same time, we know how grimy and dirty recruiting is inside of the SEC. And if you thought it was dirty now, wait until a player and a coach from an opposing team is on the phone talking about, moving and going to rival. What a distraction that's going to be during the season, or a player decides to stop playing. So, I understand the worry, the concern, what could be the can of worms that will be open and the potential problems that it can create. But I also believe that players, should have more rights. I'm just not a big fan of, playing for a rival one year and then going to the rival other side and playing on that squad the next year. I just think it's really weird to me.
I think you're exactly right about that, Jason. I'm glad to hear you say that. Another story that's going on in Knoxville right now, you've got, some players who've kind of been suspended. Seems like they're trying to work their way back. Obviously, maybe one of the more high-profile names, at least to maybe folks outside the state of Tennessee, is Caden Salter, the quarterback here. What is the latest on the guys around the Tennessee program who've been suspended for whatever may have happened in that, incident, a couple of months ago? Is there any new information you can give us about that right now?
Yeah, you had some players. Two went to the transfer portal. Isaiah Washington was one, and they're not going to play. They signed with Tennessee. not going to play, but you have other guys that, including quarterback Caden Salter, Aaron Willis, that they have not been reinstated yet. It looks like they're heading into that direction, but Coach Heupel is making sure that they understand that it's a privilege and a right to play football inside of the SEC and play at Tennessee. And the punishment, I didn't think warranted being kicked off, but at the same time, they have to understand that what they did is not right. And I don't believe in throwing guys away just because they made a mistake. You know, it's a great opportunity to use the incident as a teaching moment. You saw Jeremy Banks, you know, be dismissed, but Coach Pruitt and company did a really good job of investing in him, and he's made a difference in the community of Knoxville. He's pouring back into young folks around here, and you know he's changed a lot of his ways. And so I believe these guys have the same opportunity to do that, and they can live and learn.
Let me finish with this. I know you touched on this a moment ago, but just kind of, round out the conversation here. When you look at the big changes that are on the way for college sports with obviously the name, image, likeness stuff that's on its way in, players getting a chance to cash in on their fame, and the transfer rule, the one-time transfer, we've already seen a lot of, folks trying to take advantage of that, players here this offseason. Would you say that from your perspective as a former player, guy who obviously still knows a lot of players right now, I'm assuming, would you say these are changes for the better for the most part for the sport, or do you have skepticism about it?
I think it just depends what kind of framework that's in place, and hopefully there's some type of uniform rule or law that will discourage states from just trying to get recruiting advantages for their universities. I mean, you saw the University of Georgia. I mean, their governor is a Georgia grad. Yeah. Everyone in the picture had on red ties. So I mean, you got to just be worried about that. Tennessee's governor is an Auburn grad. So you just want to make sure that at the end of the day, these players have put their bodies on the line. They should be able to make money from their own name, but let's not get too crazy here, and then not have any rules in place and not have some type of structure because it can be crazy. But the places where football is king, where the university doesn't really have to compete with a pro team, I mean, I think those schools have a great opportunity to sway some recruits, to maybe have some transfers come in because there's some earning potential. But it's really all predicated on the play of the players. No one wants to, endorse a player that's a bench warmer and can't make any plays.
Right.
No one wants to endorse a scrub. So at the end of the day, you got to ball out, you got to make plays, and you can open up opportunities for yourself. You should be able to do that.
Well, Jason, I tell you what, I always love your perspective on the SEC. And for folks who want more of the media stuff that you're doing, your show each and every day, how can people connect with you and find you online?
SwainEvent.com is the website. We have a free app that's available on the Apple Store, Android, and the Google Play Store for Android. So go there. You can follow me at Swain Event on Twitter, and we broadcast on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter each and every morning from 7 to 10. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Jason, it's great to get a chance to speak to you. I look forward to having you on the show again very soon as well.
Let's do it.
Sounds good. Jason Swain there, great former Tennessee wide receiver, broadcaster. Of course, the folks on YouTube, as you might imagine, G. Grace, Bama boy, talking about Tennessee. No surprise here, the Bama fan, not a fan of the Vol, says, the Tennessee would be the last school I would send my son to. Auburn and South Carolina would be a close second and third. So, obviously, I'm not surprised that G. Grace says no to Tennessee, no to Auburn. Those are huge Alabama rivals. But what's your beef with South Carolina, G? What is your beef there? Mike D also says nobody wants to see that ugly color orange. So the YouTube folks, performing exactly as you'd expect them to related to all of this. Also on the Facebook side of things, we'll get a few more comments on this. We'll kind of roll on with the rest of the show here for a moment. Jeremy Pettis wants to see Tennessee bring back Derek Dooley as coach. That's kind of a funny thing to think about. Tennille Calvino, though, on the subject of loyalty, though. And look, this is where I kind of come across a little bit of an old head a little bit, and I do realize this. And, Jason says, listen, Jason Swain, who you heard a moment ago, says, hey, Tennessee fans have made peace with the idea of To'oTo'o going to Tuscaloosa a long time ago. If you follow that recruitment, there was transfer portal. It seemed like a foregone conclusion that To'oTo'o was going to go to Alabama. Then there was this weird brief moment where it seemed like Ohio State was surging in that particular story, and then, kind of end up back at Alabama before it's all said and done. So I realized that, that's the perspective of someone who's obviously following that story really closely. But listen, for every school in the SEC, for every team in the SEC, there are a bunch of casual fans who are not, living and dying with every single moment of this. All they kind of know are just, the small handful of the best players in their team. And when they see one of the guys who was like a best player on the team a year ago now suiting up and being a part of the big rivalry the next year on the other side of the field for the rival itself, Alabama, I don't think that's good for college football. I think it's a little bit of a blemish on the brand of the sport. You got to cultivate loyalty among fans, and the way you do that is some sort of belief that you get loyalty among players, which is not to say that I want to restrict all the freedoms for all the players and never give them any, ability to move around whatsoever. But listen, college football has benefited the players who play it, the coaches who coach it, the fans who watch it for 150 years. And if you want to see it exist as the sport at the same level, the same stature that it has been for the next 150 years, you have to do things to protect the stability. Anything that threatens the stability of the sport threatens its popularity. Now, there are some people, and there is no doubt this is true, there are some people, media types, academic types in some case, whatever you want to say, who would love nothing more than to see the popularity of college football reduced, to see it diminish, to see it shrink. They don't like the way in which college football, just has such a outsized influence on the societies where it's a big deal. They don't like that. And sometimes it seems like those people are the people who are arguing the most for this kind of radical change to the sport. I don't know what you do about that. My suggestion is you just notice it. Just notice who is arguing in favor of some of the radical changes sometimes for the sport. Pay close attention to who's in favor of this stuff and ask yourself, do these people really have the best interest of college football in mind? Let me do a few more comments here. We'll get ready to go. Scotty Gorup, glad to have you in the comment section. Scotty, thank you for being here today. We got a lot more fun stuff to go and do today, so I'm glad to have you here. Antonio Ragland wondering what loyalty means on the idea of To'o bouncing from Knoxville to Tuscaloosa. Dan Carl says can't beat Bama on the field, so now they're trying to on the air. I don't know if that's the Jimbo Fisher thing or not. I guess my point on that, though, Dan, is that playing nice with Alabama and trying not to offend Nick Saban, that doesn't seem to be really working either. Alabama's kind of marching unabated towards national championships, did so again last season. So why not take the fight to them a little bit? Why not do that? That seemed to work for Ed Orgeron in 2019. Maybe that is the way you ought to go on something like this. Roussel Powell, not a fan of Jimbo Fisher. I don't know about that, Roussel. I think that Jimbo is still going to be heard from the SEC in a big way. I mean, look, when you look at those coaches who are a threat to topple Saban, or at least even nudge Saban off his spot a little bit. Let's not even use a word like topple. A coach who's a threat to kind of move him off that spot. The fact that Jimbo has a national championship, that he's got the gravitas that comes from the big contract at the big school with all the financial resources. They've been recruiting well, nowhere near as well as Alabama, but better than most of the other schools in the SEC. I think if you're a Bama fan, you ought to be paying at least a little bit of attention to Texas A&M, especially this year. Remember this, for all of the talk about Alabama being bulletproof and impervious to any kind of threat, Bama's only won the SEC West twice in the last 4 years. It was Auburn in 2017. It was LSU in 2019. Are you telling me it would be impossible for this A&M team here in 2021 to do the same thing? Not quite so sure I'd buy into that. Bruce Eklund, the idea of Bama working out with a sign on the wall. Bill Watley says that he's a big Auburn fan, but Saban handled that masterfully. Yeah, Bill, I would agree with you on that, too. I'm not a Saban fan, not an Alabama fan, but I think you've got a pretty good insight into Saban's personality there, where when Saban wants to, he can actually be pretty entertaining. Like, he can be kind of fun, right? And, his deadpan sense of – we had the SEC LOL a couple of weeks ago. Saban telling a joke, and he wasn't the first person to ever tell that joke, but he told it really well. Good comedic timing. I think that even an Auburn fan like Bill or a non-Bama fan like me can say he's actually pretty funny sometimes. Frank Sims says, let's not go WWF. So, Frank, I mean, I'd say that if you're trying to really generate the energy you need to beat Nick Saban Alabama, why not go WWF? You know, the kind of the pro wrestling reference. Why? I mean, this is my problem. We talked about this on last week's show, and after this we're going to move on. But this is kind of my problem with Brian Harsin, is that I don't know that a guy like Harsin at Auburn, who wants to be the in-state rival to Alabama, I don't know if a guy like that's got enough shtick. I don't know, to use your phrase, going WWF. You know, I don't know how capable of he is of kind of going WWF when he needs to. I mean, can you honestly deny that the more pro wrestling type aspects of Ed Orgeron's personality, you think that's hurt him? The fact that he sounds so Louisiana when he speaks, and he's got that, you know, big, kind of beefy build, and, you know, he just has this huge personality. Doesn't that help Ed Orgeron? Doesn't that draw a sharp contrast against Nick Saban? So I get what you're saying of I don't want to mix my pro wrestling and my college football. I get what you're saying on that. I will also admit I'm biased because I love pro wrestling, but I would also say that the pro wrestling style stuff, the cutting the promo and the getting the cheers and, you know, casting yourself as different than your competition, I'd say for the most part that kind of stuff kind of works. So good comments all the way around. Appreciate everybody kind of weighing in on this. By the way, Logan Effort says, is it really a feud between Saban and Jimbo, or is the media just blowing it up? We said this before. Clearly the media is blowing up part of this, but in Jimbo's, to his credit, he's not really running from this as of yet. So good stuff there. We got more comments coming on both Facebook and YouTube. I promise that. But we've also got a lot more business to take care of in the program here today. We just heard from Jason Swain there, the former Tennessee wide receiver, talking about his feelings as a former player about how the new name, image, likeness, and the transfer rules, all the big changes on the way to college football, how that's going to impact the sport. I want to keep that discussion going as we now go all points bulletin, APB, all around the rest of the SEC. We'll start in Athens, Georgia. It's the home now of former Georgia coach Mark Richt, who works as an ACC analyst, but also appeared on the Paul Feinbaum show this week. And in discussing how the new landscape for college football impacts the sport, Richt had some of his former players at Georgia on his mind when he interviewed Paul Feinbaum. For instance, for some people who are maybe skeptical of what the new endorsement potential for college players looks like, and maybe who think it has the potential of being a bad thing, Richt on the Feinbaum show can think of at least one example of how it might actually work out pretty well, and he uses two of his former quarterbacks to kind of cite the example of this. This is former Georgia coach Mark Richt on with Paul Feinbaum.
Well, one thing I think is, let's say a guy like a couple of my quarterbacks that I had, they did not leave early, but at Georgia, you know, you take Aaron Murray and you take DJ Shockley, had very modest professional careers. Those guys could have made more money in college than they probably could make once they got out of college. And I think what's going to happen is some guys may be less likely to leave early to go to the NFL because they may have some good deals where they're at, may not be in such a big rush, depending on how lucrative these things can get.
So very interesting stuff there from Mark Richt saying that, hey, listen, when you got these guys who are maybe not going to be first-round NFL picks and only going to have, you know, somewhat short, maybe not, you know, all that remarkable of an NFL career, the chance that an Aaron Murray or a DJ Shockley, or you can think about your own school's version of those kinds of quarterbacks, the chance they have to make money in college would actually be a good thing. And as some Georgia fans have pointed out to me, because I do Dog Nation Daily each and every day, and maybe as a fan of a different school, you may think the same thing of, for that player who's on the fence about coming back for his senior year, of thinking, well, I may not be a first-round pick, but at least I can get paid. All of a sudden, the name, image, likeness opportunity provides that chance for that player to get paid while still in college, and maybe that keeps him around for just a little bit longer. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. So kind of a positive take on that from Rick when it comes to the name, image, likeness stuff. However, on the idea of the transfer rule, the kind of thing where you leave one school, you go to another, and you're immediately eligible, essentially removing all penalty for kind of bouncing from one place to the next. In Rick's mind, he sees one potential problem with that. I think this is very well stated from a guy who's obviously been around the block a bunch of times around college football, Mark Richt again from the Feinbaum Show.
The other thing I'm worried about is when things get tough, I'm going to leave. If I don't get to start, I'm going to leave. You know, where are you going to learn to go through adversity? Where are you going to grow up into a man that can handle, you know, the tough times and fight through it I mean, a guy like DJ Shockley sat behind David Green for 4 years and ended up starting and won an SEC championship. And he could write his ticket in the state of Georgia with how people feel about him. And, but those kind of stories are going to be far and few between over time.
You know the Simon and Garfunkel song where it talks about where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? I think in the SEC world, we may be one day all singing, where did DJ Shockley go? The story for those of you who are old enough to remember, 2005, Shockley as the Georgia quarterback wins the SEC title after having sat the previous 3 years behind David Green as Georgia's quarterback there. Shockley played only sparingly in those years, but eventually got his chance to be the quarterback, and he goes on to have a huge year. And as Rick says, as someone like myself who lives in the state of Georgia, I can tell you that DJ remains a hugely popular figure with not just Georgia football fans, but sports fans all across this state, because of the fact that he did stick it out. He did overcome some adversity. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why those of us who like college football so much, one of the reasons we like it is because it does teach good life lessons, that good things can happen for you if you're willing to overcome and persevere through challenging times. Shockley did that in 2005. In 2021, is there even still the possibility of a story like that? Now, you may say, we got that from Mac Jones at Alabama a year ago, who could have transferred but didn't and ended up getting glory because of that. Kyle Trask at Florida, very much maybe the same way. So it's not that these stories can never happen. It's just that they may happen a lot less than they once did. I think it's really good stuff from the Paul Feinbaum show. Make sure you check out the full interview there on the ESPN platform. You can get a lot more about that. Our All Points Bulletin continues here on SEC Country Live right now. We'll now move to Gainesville, Florida. And there was a very interesting story at Saturday Down South this week of Ryder quoting an anonymous SEC assistant about what he sees from Todd Grantham's defense for the Gators here this year. In particular, one area in which he expects Florida to be much improved over a year ago. The last time we saw Florida, obviously, he was getting completely trounced in its bowl game against Oklahoma. The defense was getting shredded. Now, you add to that the SEC championship game loss to Alabama, in which the Florida offense gave the Gators a chance to win, but Alabama also scored every time it wanted to there in that game. Final game of the regular season with the LSU offense, moved it up and down the field. Of course, the famous Marco Wilson shoe throw. But the Florida defense had its big-time share of problems late in the season, so much so that Florida fans really wanted to move on from Todd Grantham here during this offseason. That did not happen at Florida, but there is maybe some room to believe that the situation about to get better. Let me read you the quote here from Saturday Down South, SEC assistant quoting the story saying that Florida's going to be much better up front this year. They brought in all those defensive tackles, and the young guy, Javon Dexter, obviously a well-known name to recruiting observers, says this guy is going to be a problem. They'll be tough to run on this time, and watch how much better the linebackers are going to be. So that's a little bit of a contrarian take. I don't think many of us expected to hear praise for the Florida defense here during this offseason. But what it also kind of brings to mind for me is, think about this show. If you've watched this show over the course of the last few weeks, we simply respond to whatever news is out there, whatever the prevailing conversations are around the SEC and college football. That's the conversation we have on the show. And I will say that we've been pretty light on Florida content the last couple of weeks. Now, some people are going to say, well, BA, that's because you're a Georgia fan. You don't want to talk about those, as we say, lousy, stinking Gators. You don't want to do that. You don't want to talk Florida. And listen, I don't make any bones about the fact that I'm a Georgia fan. Therefore, Florida is a rival to my program. But as I said before, we're happy to react to the news, whatever it might be. And that's kind of the scenario that sets up our conversation, whatever other people are talking about. And it is so amazing to me how little talk there's been about Florida this season. I don't mean for the bad. I don't mean for the good. I mean kind of for nothing. It's just been very, very quiet. Whereas if you want to go back a year ago, and this is, I think, very, very instructive about kind of how the media is when it comes to these kinds of things. Very instructive. That a year ago, when Florida was trying to break through and win the SEC East for the first time under Dan Mullen after 3 straight wins for Georgia in that division, there was all kinds of talk about this is the year for Florida. Dan Mullen, top play caller in the sport. Big breakout year for Kyle Trask. And all of the energy that existed around that. There was a lot of motivation to have that conversation because for the average media person who has the attention span of a, housefly, that just kind of represented something new. It was something different to talk about than we had been talking about for the 3 previous years with Georgia on top year after year after year. All of a sudden now it's Florida who's the reigning SEC East champion, and actually this offseason they're getting less discussion than they did a year ago. Now part of this is related to the departures, right? There's no Kyle Pitts, there's no Kyle Trask, there's a lot of guys who were in this program who are not there anymore. But beyond that, I'm actually kind of amazed at how quiet it is around the Florida front right now. So much so that obviously I love interacting with our comment section. I guess the one thing I'm kind of curious about, with all of this is, are Florida fans as confident in their team right now as this SEC assistant quoted in the story at Saturday Down South are? Are Florida fans feeling that good about what Todd Grantham does? Because there's, to me, always been a disconnect between the feeling of fans in Gainesville, and I'm going to try to say this as objectively as I can, not the guy who does the Georgia show every single day, but a guy who tries to pay attention to what the mood and the feeling of SEC fans kind of is. And so if you're a Florida fan, I'm dying to hear from you on this. I sort of get the impression there's a little bit more restlessness in Gainesville about some of the stuff related to Florida than the average, I guess, news cycle would lead you to believe is the case. I see a lot of frustration from Florida fans with the lack of recruiting success for Dan Mullen. I see a lot of frustration from Gators fans about kind of the lackadaisical approach to not replacing Todd Grantham during the offseason. I see some doubt, some skepticism about what's really going on there at quarterback. Emory Jones, as someone have you believe the heir apparent to Kyle Trask. I start to wonder if Florida fans themselves really believe that is true. And for Florida that shows up in the preseason top 25s, most of the ones that are out there, ESPN I think has them right now ranked 17th. You don't get, at least in my mind, and maybe our comment section is about to prove me wrong on this, you don't get a lot of Florida fans say, boy, we're about to shock the world. You thought it was our year a year ago. Wait till you see what we do this year. I'm not hearing a bunch of that here during this offseason. Maybe I'm just not listening to the right places, but I don't know how much of that I'm really getting. So I'd love to hear from some Florida fans on that, because I think it's a kind of a fun offseason conversation to have. By the way, Morgan Rectian checking in. He's a big Florida fan. He's over here on the YouTube side of things saying, as far as the lack of talk about the Florida Gators, he says, let's keep it that way, BA. I like it that way. So this is a Florida fan, and Morgan, who says, we're going to sneak up and we're going to catch some people off guard. He doesn't mind the idea of Florida not getting a lot of attention. He also says a Heisman finalist not good enough to play anywhere else makes sense. Explain why. So he's also kind of going back and forth here about his quarterback Kyle Trask, saying I haven't given him enough credit, things like that. Morgan, one more from him, and then we'll go over to the Facebook side of things. Says we don't think we will be in the national championship talk this year. Make or break year for Grantham. I do think EJ will be good though. Don't compare him to a Kyle Trask. He's talking about Emory Jones there on that front. I kind of wonder. I wonder how much Anthony Richardson's going to be talked about there in the kind of the Florida quarterback situation. There's not a chance, especially based on we played some of this audio for you on this show a few weeks ago. Some of the discussion from Mullen about kind of how Emory Jones finishes the spring. I almost wonder if the door isn't open just a little bit for something like an Anthony Richardson getting a chance to push for some playing time there. I kind of pay attention to that. Clayton Todd Higgs Pinkston checking in saying, I'm not saying about whether he's good or not, but so he's kind of weighing on this conversation. Jeremy Pettis there as well saying Florida wants to try to under-promise and over-deliver this year. So maybe that's the case. Maybe Jeremy kind of saying something similar to what Morgan said a moment ago. Of course, Jeremy's not a Florida fan, but echoing the thing the Florida fan said is maybe they like the idea of kind of sneaking in here and kind of quiet. There's one of the things I always judge is like SEC media days, and not that the media ever gets it right anyway, but it is fairly reflective of common opinion when you vote on who's going to win these divisions, what the gap is between, say, a Georgia and a Florida. How much, because, most of the preseason magazines are going to give you Georgia winning that division this year. How close the view is between Georgia and Florida, and how legitimate of a chance is Florida given in the SEC East this offseason. I'm very, very curious to see that. Very curious to see how that plays out. So obviously comments continue to roll in on this topic with Florida and what the expectation is there. G. Greg's Bama Boy on YouTube saying Mullen's will have a great season if he can manage to win 9 games. Yeah, the other thing I think that G is kind of reflecting this is a little tougher schedule for Florida here this year. They do have a cross-division game against Alabama this year. Alabama coming to Gainesville. Obviously the yearly matchup against LSU, and on this show, we believe that LSU's better in 2021 than it was in 2020. So, in addition to the Georgia game and the SEC East, you've also got the 2 big SEC West games. A little tougher schedule than we've seen Florida play because you do add Alabama there as your other cross-divisional matchup. So, pretty interesting stuff all the way around. Some rare praise for the Florida defense. Rare in the fact that we haven't heard much good said about the Florida defense in a while, and we haven't heard much about Florida so far this offseason, but it comes to you there from our friends at Saturday Down South. As SEC Country rolls on here, and our All Points Bulletin continues to check in on some of the big news around the rest of the SEC, let's pop over to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where this week LSU coach Ed Orgeron made a radio appearance on the sports radio station there in Baton Rouge, the T-Bob Hebert show, the show that the T-Bob is on out there, and the subject of the quarterback, TJ Finley, transferring out of LSU came up, and what the future is for Finley, what the future is for the rest of the quarterback situation. Let's actually start right there with TJ about how Ed Orgeron found out that Finley, after spring practice, this is a guy that, by the way, played some snaps for LSU a year ago, and then at times kind of a pivotal role, but will not be there for 2021. Orgeron talked on the radio and there in Baton Rouge about how he found out about all of that. This is Ed Orgeron.
TJ did everything right. He said, Coach, I need to have a meeting with you. Very heartfelt. It was a very hard decision for him. He felt that it was the best decision for him in his career. Obviously, I asked him, tried to have him stay, and I think the world of TJ, and I think he's a great young man. I think he's a great quarterback. But he felt that there was something that he needed to do. But I got to say, he did everything right. He did it first class, and we wish him the very best wherever he goes. Wherever he goes, someone's going to get a great young man, a great quarterback.
So when you move Finley out of the discussion, now that leaves 3 LSU quarterbacks. Garrett Nussmeier, the incoming freshman, Miles Brennan, the start at the beginning of last year, and then, of course, Max Johnson, who came on after the Brennan injury and really after TJ Finley had his moment there as well. Max Johnson seemed to solidify that quarterback position near the end of the year. So it remains to be seen who the starting quarterback is, but you do get some insight from Orgeron in this interview that it sounds like right now it's more of a battle between Brennan and Johnson than it is Brennan, Johnson, and Nussmeier. Nussmeier may eventually get his moment, but it seems like right now he's a little bit green, a little bit young to be a serious contender to start as LSU's quarterback. More from Ed Orgeron from the Baton Rouge radio interview with some insight on that.
Obviously Garrett's going to have a chance, but as we saw in the spring game, I think Garrett knows that he's going to have to acquire a little bit more experience. But those guys are neck and neck right now. 2 great quarterbacks. I believe in both of them got great families, great leadership. Let the best man win. And we're going to go through camp. And we're going to decide towards the end of camp who's the best quarterback ball football team.
So probably not a huge surprise there that Orgeron kind of used this more as a Brennan Johnson thing than it is a Brennan Johnson Nussmeier type thing, even though I think that most people would tell you that Nussmeier is a pretty bright-looking prospect. Some sort of future moment. You could obviously expect him to do big things as the LSU quarterback, but that future is not now. Who would I favor in a battle between Johnson and Brennan? Keep in mind here, I'm saying this a couple hundred miles away from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. LSU fans, I'm hoping they are weighing in on this in our comment section because their opinion on this would matter to me. But I guess I probably favor the guy that we saw at the end of last year, Johnson, more so than I kind of favor anything related to Miles Brennan. And I'll be completely honest about something. There's a little bit of a bias I probably have against Brennan in that, and I know he was much younger back then. It's hard to judge him on this. But Brennan kind of had a chance to start as LSU's quarterback and didn't really get the job done. I mean, he was, being looked at and being given the possibility of emerging as the LSU quarterback pre-Joe Burrow. The reason why we have a Joe Burrow story at LSU, to some extent, is based on the fact that Brennan, when giving a chance to kind of emerge there as a quarterback, did not do so. That opened the door for Joe Burrow to kind of slide in as an Ohio State transfer, take that job, and obviously the rest is history. Now, Brennan's a little bit older. He's more experienced. He's at least been in the program a little longer. But I guess at this point, I probably view Max Johnson as just the better overall prospect. And as Orgeron said, you got big families here in the fact that, Max Johnson connected to Brad Johnson, the former Super Bowl winning quarterback. The Brennan family goes back deep in the state of Louisiana there. So there's some family ties here that make this quarterback situation, I think, pretty interesting. But if you ask me which guy I favor, I would say I probably favor Max Johnson over Miles Brennan, but I'm also quite interested and very willing to hear what LSU fans think about this topic, and we'll do that before the show is done today. One more APP story to get to for you here on SEC Country Live today, and we'll kind of stay in the same basic part of the world where obviously one of the big names to know for the class of 2023 is Arch Manning, the quarterback out of the powerhouse program there in the state of Louisiana, and obviously the grandson of Archie Manning, the former Ole Miss and New Orleans Saints quarterback, the nephew of both Peyton and Eli Manning. He's the son of Cooper Manning, the other Manning brother that many of you may be aware of. And for those of you that follow recruiting, you know that for the 2023 cycle, the Manning story is going to be a huge one because of his last name, but also because it seems like based on some of the recruiting stuff that I've read that his game actually matches this up. This is not just one of these inflated stories on the basis of it being someone you've heard of before and a last name that you're familiar with, that Arch Manning truly is a big-time quarterback prospect. And 24/7 Sports reported this week about some visits that Manning has upcoming, but there was also a story that appeared at ESPN this week about the idea of a sleeper team in Manning's recruitment, that you think about an LSU or some of the the big programs there, but Adam Rittenberg, writing for ESPN.com here this week, also talks about the idea that Ole Miss, the school that Eli Manning went to, Arch's uncle and his grandfather Archie Manning went to, that possibly Ole Miss could be a sleeper team in this recruitment for Arch Manning. Now, I think this is really interesting because unlike many of you and a lot of folks in the media, I am not a huge believer in Lane Kiffin. I think Kiffin's ability to generate headlines off the field is far more impressive than his ability to generate headlines on the field. As a coach, what is the result that you could point to for Kiffin to say, see, this proves everything that I've ever tried to say about Lane Kiffin being a top-flight coach? I'd argue don't really have that, right? I mean, playing Alabama close in 2020 is not the example of somebody being a great coach. I think Kiffin's a fun guy to have around a program. He's obviously a dynamic face. He does the interviews. He's active on social media. He seems to be really good at courting attention, but I've always felt like there was a much better chance that Kiffin was a short-term proposition at a place like Ole Miss than a long-term proposition. But if you want to make me wrong on that, if you want to turn Lane Kiffin into something that's more than just kind of a flash in the pan, program desperate for attention, Kiffin knows how to cultivate that attention. If you want to make Lane Kiffin feel like an SEC coach in good standing, the kind of guy that has a chance to stick around for a few years and could sit at the same table of the Kirby Smarts, the Dan Mullins, the serious coaches in the sport, the Jimbo Fishers, the best way to have that happen is this year, and the year about to have, 2021, to see someone like Matt Corral put up the big stats. Remember, we had Dave Bartu on from College Football Matrix a few weeks ago. That's an analytics-minded guy. That's a stat cruncher. Dave said that he thought that the highest ceiling for a quarterback in the SEC this year might be Matt Corral. You see on your screen that might be the player worth watching from the SEC from a quarterback standpoint here this year. Well, obviously, if Kiffin puts up those big numbers with Corral, all of a sudden being much more into the Arch Manning conversation for 2023, all of a sudden that becomes a much more likely possibility. We know that the Manning family, the entirety of that clan, has deep, deep ties to Ole Miss. The Peyton situation that allowed him to be at Tennessee was just kind of based on the unusual circumstances that existed at Oxford at the time, but this is a family that's deeply tied to Ole Miss. They'd be willing to give the benefit of the doubt, I'm guessing, to that Rebels program, but you also probably guess they need to see that program look like it has some staying power, that Lane Kiffin can show himself to be more than just a character. I talked about pro wrestling stuff a little earlier. Kiffin's obviously got the pro wrestling part of all this figured out. The persona, the shtick, the gimmick. Kiffin's got that figured out. But now he needs to add some steak to go along with the sizzle. And if he can do that, then all of a sudden, you're in business for a guy like Arch Manning. And maybe more important for Rebels fans, you've got a coach who might have the chance to stick around for a while. I think this one could be worth watching because there's no doubt about it. we had commenters before kind of, talking, down on Jimbo Fisher. You poll our audience on the YouTube side, on the Facebook side, you see over and over again, I think just not Ole Miss fans, because frankly, Ole Miss has a smaller fan base than most of the rest of the SEC. It's not Ole Miss fans. It's just sort of random run-of-the-mill SEC fans. They kind of like the idea of Kiffin. Sometimes they don't like the idea of Jimbo Fisher for whatever reason. I think there's some people that wouldn't mind seeing a coach who cultivates celebrity as well as Lane Kiffin does. I think there's some, folks that wouldn't mind seeing that guy actually have some success in the SEC. Well, what you do this year with Matt Corral opens the door for future quarterbacks, and this, if it's ever going to happen, would appear to be Lane Kiffin's time to shine. That is our All Points Bulletin here on SEC Country Live. We have a pretty good SEC LOL we'll do here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Let me take a couple of your comments here. G. Gray Spammer Boy on the YouTube side says that Lane Kiffin is a play-calling genius. Yeah, you put him as a lieutenant working underneath Nick Saban, things seem to work really well. I mean, there's no doubt that I thought that Kiffin was a terrific play caller for Alabama when he was there in 2014, 2015, 2016. I have great respect for him as a play caller, but now you're asking him to do more than that. You're asking him to actually manage the nuts and bolts of a program. This is more than just drawing up plays in the dirt now, and I think that is still the realm for Kiffin that kind of remains to be seen. Obviously, the folks at Tennessee, I mean, they've kind of seemingly forgiven and moving on from this, but they had some real problems with the stewardship that Kiffin showed for that Vols program when he was there, and the USC stuff kind of speaks for itself there. So yeah, I mean, I think the jury's still out, but obviously Kiffin's got a chance to really, kind of weigh in on this himself and show what he's all about there before it's all said and done. Justin Richwine checking in on Facebook to give us a roll tide. Appreciate that. Scotty Gorup says that Lane Kiffin's an interview genius. Don't know much more about it than that. Yeah, I mean, Kiffin seems to have that part of this figured out in the way that some coaches would die to. There is a need in 2021 to be good at creating attention for your program. That's something that you need to be able to do now. And that's something that Kiffin is good at. But at some point in time, you have to kind of match the game with the fame. You have to actually deliver something on the field. But there's no doubt the reason why, Kiffin shows up on the radar of all these SEC teams as a potential coaching candidate before he took the Ole Miss job, and in some cases, even after he took the Ole Miss job, is because when it comes to generating the kind of attention that programs feel like they have to have, Kiffin is really pretty good at being able to do that. Jeremy Pettis says that Kiffin is more of a troll than I am. Yeah, Kiffin has that part of it kind of figured out too. There's no question about that. Also, the subject of the Ohio State receiver that just got picked up by Alabama, Jamison Williams, that's big and going on right now. I know Williams was quoted by Rivals.com recently kind of talking about his reasons for leaving the Ohio State program, not feeling like he had a role there, thankful to find out that Alabama had a spot for him. I think one of the real curiosities here is for a guy that thought the Ohio State receiver situation was too deep, and it is amazingly deep. There's a lot of very good talent in that Ohio State room, so much so that guys like Julian Fleming aren't even getting to play very much right now. How comfortable is Williams going to end up being in Alabama, a place that's also, once again, really deep at the receiver position? Blake Robinson checking in to say, just dropping in to say hi while I got a few minutes at work. I'm just glad to see the administration at Auburn finally going outside the box and hiring a coach without Auburn connections, War Eagle. So Blake Robinson, happy about the Harsin era getting off to a good start there at Auburn. And Blake, I appreciate you checking in to give your opinion there on that. Jim Blakeney also wants to know about Mike Leach going to be any better in year two. Well, the one thing we have seen about Mike Leach in his career are those year two leaps forward, right? He's had those Texas Tech and Washington State that this would seem to be, kind of a pattern with Leach. And if you are a Hail State fan, the one thing you may have also noticed as well is that the ESPN FPI, the Football Power Index preseason data and information actually was very, very high on Mississippi State. So this is a time in which, and it's one of the things that's going to make SEC Media Days really fun again in July. We're going to have great coverage of that for you, by the way, here on SEC Country Live. With the return of SEC Media Days, it is our first Media Days with Kiffin at Ole Miss and Leach at Mississippi State and all these big personalities that exist in the SEC right now. So So there are, I think, some expectations around Starkville. I have to admit I'm a little skeptical. There's the schedule for media days. You get Mullen, Orgeron, and Beamer getting it started on July 19th. Smart, Stoops, Kiffin, and Heupel coming in that Tuesday. Then Leach there the same day as Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, and the brand new Vanderbilt coach Clark Lee on July 21st. And, of course, it rounds out the final day, Thursday, July 22nd, with Arkansas, new Auburn coach Brian Harsin, and the second-year Missouri coach Eli Drinkwitz, both Pittman and Drinkwitz making their debuts at SEC Media Days there as well. I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical of Mike Leach, his personality, how well that fits into the demands from an SEC fan base who don't want you goofing off, who don't want you acting too silly. They want you winning games. I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical about how Leach fits into that culture here, but there are some people out there that say Mississippi State's going to have a big second year, as he has done in previous stops. Jay Stewart says, does To'o play at Alabama? I'm guessing he probably will. I mean, I know that's a deep and talented roster, but my guess is he finds some space there to operate. Tennille Calvino, a Georgia fan, not too happy with Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt canceled on Georgia last season. There's a lot of bad blood right now from Georgia fans with Vanderbilt, kind of an interesting thing. Good to see Hugh checking in the comment section over here today. Asking some questions about Dan Mullen's wife and her proclivity for affection with some of the Florida players. That's always a topic of conversation in our comment section, it seems to be. Mike D also talking some Mullen over here there as well. Says not to show up wearing those Nike cleats on mom's hardwood floors. Yeah, that's been a topic of conversation there in the past as well. So really fun stuff from our comment section on both Facebook and YouTube. I love doing this each and every Wednesday on SEC Country Live. Before we go today, though, let me have some fun with you via our SEC LOL. You know, Jamie Foxx is really one of the most talented, I mean, I don't even know what to call him. Actor, musician, he's done it all, right? And he just finds a way to just deliver in every role that he's in, including recently stopping by to see the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. It's not an SEC LOL, but we'll play it for you anyway as our LOL for today. Fox hanging around the Tech program and also delivering a imitation of a coach. For those of you that played in high school, for those of you that spend time around coaches, tell me if this doesn't remind you of some of the coaches that maybe you knew growing up. This is good stuff from Jamie Foxx. Take a look at this.
Guys, I know all of you. I know where your family's from. I've been in your house. But now that you're on the field, you're mine. Okay? Quarterback, my quarterback, when you come out, what are you doing? You're floating too far back. It causes too much over here. I want you to come down the line. Read the defense, the defensive end. What'd you do last week? Oh, you didn't read. Look, I'm in the background. I'm dancing. I got scholarship money. I don't give a rat's. Excuse my French. You come here, easy read there. Come at me. Come at me, son. Come at me. Forearm shiver here. Turn right around for the pass. Okay? I love all you guys, but I can't have all of you on the field. So somebody's parents is not going to see their son play. You're not going to have dirt on your jersey. But that's fine because I still love you.
I mean, how funny is that from Jamie Foxx? I mean, that's like every coach that I probably ever spent time around. The cadence of the voice, the accent, he just seems to really nail that there. So really funny stuff. Not exactly SEC, but certainly LOL. And so we'll make that our SEC LOL for today. Hey, for those of you who've chosen to make SEC Country Live a part of your week each and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, certainly appreciate that. Jason Swain, the former Tennessee wide receiver, stopping by to see us today. I appreciate his time there as well. One more request, if I could ask it from you. For those of you that follow us on YouTube, let folks know that we're there. For those of you that watch us on Facebook, share this show with your friends. It's a way for us to remind folks that each and every week we're talking SEC right here on SEC Country Live. Many of you are already doing this. I certainly appreciate that. For those of you that participate in our comments, makes the show fun for me to do, and I'm glad to be able to share the conversation with you. We'll see you back here again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. for SEC Country Live, and I look forward to talking to you all then.